If you love to bake, have you ever considered the role that yeast plays in your recipes?
Well, today on WTF, we're going to take a look at two types of yeast, Instaferm Red and Instaferm Gold. And we're going to make two great recipes, a classic focaccia and a not your grandma's monkey bread. Hello and welcome to WTF, where we transform food here in the Modernist Pantry Test Kitchen. I'm Chef Scott Gehring.
And I'm Janie Wang, the owner of Modernist Pantry. Today, Scott and I are going to be talking all about instant yeast, which is such a cool product to use in the kitchen when you're baking breads. So, Scott, what is the difference between an instant yeast versus, which I think most of us are familiar with, an active dry yeast?
So active dry yeast is probably the one that most people are familiar with because you get that in the grocery store. That's the most common one. The active dry yeast, you will need to mix with water and you'll allow it to proof up a little bit before you add it to your bread recipe or add your flour, everything like that. Instant yeast you can mix directly in with the flour and then make your recipe. So it actually cuts down a little bit of time, which usually takes about 10 minutes for active dry yeast to really proof up. And with instant yeast, like I said, mix it directly in and then you're able to go. And we actually have two different types of instant yeast, Instaferm Gold and Instaferm Red.
All right, and what is the difference between them?
So Instaferm Red can be used with most lean doughs. It can also be used with some sweet doughs, but not every single sweet dough. Mm-hmm. And that's where Instaferm Gold comes in. And this is where a lot of the confusion happens. Mm-hmm. So when you have dough that has more than 5% sugar content, and that's 5% to the total weight of the flour. Okay. That's generally baker's ratios. You'll be able to figure it out there. Mm-hmm. That sugar can kind of impede the yeast's ability to proof up.
Okay.
It saps some of the water away. The water is what makes the yeast actually grow. And this is called an osmotolerant yeast. And mm-hmm. what that does is this actually thrives in those sweet environments. Mm-hmm. So with that extra bit of sugar, it's able to, proof up properly, and it actually works nice and fast. So that's a good property of the Gold. If you're just making a lot of lean dough, something like this focaccia here, the Red will work perfect for you. All
right, and how much yeast do you typically use in a recipe? I know each of these is about a pound, yeah. So this is plenty of yeast here. How much can we make with each one of these bricks?
So if you were using this yeast mm-hmm. just in straight dough method with no starter, anything like that, these can make between 96 and 100 loaves. Mm-hmm. In this recipe, we have something like 4 grams for this entire loaf, and that goes through like a fermentation process overnight. With the monkey bread, this goes through a much shorter process, so we use a little bit more yeast. I believe it's around 17 or 18 grams for the entire recipe. So there's a difference, between the recipe that you're doing to how much yeast you're going to need.
Okay, and I love what you've made here today, so I'm excited to hear you talk about it. Where would you like to start?
Let's start with the focaccia first.
Okay.
We'll work over here because then we can talk a lot about this. And I think that the monkey bread's kind of a show stealer, so let's save that one for the end.
Okay.
We added some 4 grams, like I said, to the total weight of the recipe. And this is just a little half batch here. And what we did is we let this sit overnight. And you can see all those little air bubbles in there, mm-hmm. right? And what that is, this recipe actually has diastatic malt powder, which we had in one of our earlier episodes, which yep. you can find in the description below.
Yep.
And diastatic malt powder contains amylase. And
mm-hmm.
amylase eats up those starches and it creates small amounts of sugar.
Mm-hmm.
Yeast loves to eat sugar. Obviously, what we talked about, too much sugar can kind of impede it, but mm-hmm. little bits of sugar that's created by that amylase, it'll eat it up and it'll create carbon dioxide, right? Mm-hmm. And those are what you see, those little bubbles. And that's what gives bread its signature structure. It's trapped in between all the starch and the gluten. And if you want to hold this, feel how light that's a large piece of bread.
It is.
But it's nice and light.
It's super fluffy.
Yes, and there's also, I took some roasted garlic and I stuffed it down in there for our health, of course. So we're able to get a lot of that nice, beautiful structure out of a small amount of the yeast here. Mm-hmm. And this recipe will be available on the blog or in the description below.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful. And so how long from start to finish did this process take? Because I remember you saying it took how many hours to proof it?
It can take anywhere from 18 to 24 hours, depending on what you're doing. And that brings up a good concern, is that eventually this yeast will have eaten all the starch and all the sugars, and then it will start to die off. So if you're making something that requires a starter, you can use this yeast to make a starter. You can use a small amount of this yeast, actually. And every day you're going to have to feed it. You're going to have to add that sugar, because over time it's going to, populate that dough. Some of it will die off, but you're going to have to keep, regenerating that yeast just naturally by feeding it, and it will create more and more.
Yeah, and this focaccia looks perfect. I can't wait to dig into this. And
Yes.
I love that you stuffed it with garlic. Yay.
Yes. So yeah, the recipe on the blog is just a basic focaccia. You can put whatever you want on it. You can put herbs, rosemary, more olive oil if you want, roasted garlic. So it's really up to you. So it's a base focaccia that you can stuff with all sorts of great things.
Wonderful. And what's this other one?
So this is monkey bread, and we took, it's kind of a caramelized monkey bread. We took the idea of monkey bread, which is kind of scraps of croissant dough that you take and you would mix just cinnamon and sugar into it, and then you'd bake it. One downfall is I never found that monkey bread was as crispy as I wanted it to be, right? And I took the idea of a queen amande, which is basically croissant dough that's rolled in cinnamon sugar, and it's baked, and it makes like this real crispy glaze on the bottom. So we took the ideas from those, and we actually made caramel. We found this worked the best. We were to make a caramel. We added a good amount of salt and some cinnamon to the caramel, and then we tossed the pieces of dough in that caramel, stuffed them into muffin tins, so they're all individual monkey breads. You can see all these crispy, gooey, glazed bits, and on the top, just a little bit more of that caramel, so when you cook it, it's not just crispy from the dough, it's crispy from that nice caramel. And this is a delicious recipe. It's basically a once a month type of recipe, just because of the amount of fat in it, but it's a delicious thing, and we're really proud of this recipe.
Yeah, and if you do want to see Scott make this recipe, we do have a video up on our Instagram and Facebook, so follow us on social media. You can get kind of the behind the scenes on how do you make this monkey bread, and of course, the recipe in the link in the description below.
Yeah. And there's one more thing, so storage. As you can see, these come and they're vacuum sealed. If you happen to get it and it is not vacuum sealed, it's totally fine. The best thing you want to do is take that, you can put it into a container and you can toss it in the freezer. That's where I like to keep all my yeast anyways.
Okay.
In the freezer, you're going to be able to hold these for a very long time, up to a year if you want, possibly more, as long as it's sealed properly. Because if any moisture starts to get to these, it could potentially activate. If it's really humid out, you don't want to leave it uncovered, anything like that, and you want to take care of your product anyways. So throw it in the freezer in a nice sealed container. If you put it into a mason jar, that works great in the freezer. Okay,
great. So now you have two wonderful options for the instant yeast to use in your recipes. I strongly recommend trying both of these, but if you do already have a recipe, can they just swap out the active dry for the instant?
So the active dry, yes, you can swap them out for all of them.
Okay.
Obviously with the active dry, your recipe is going to say put it into water, allow it to proof up before adding in your flour. You can just change it by adding these yeasts directly into the flour in the recipe and go about it as normal. Just any thing to do with yeast, you always want to make sure you understand it, so you don't want to put like boiling water or anything. Recipes will never call for that, but if this gets above, I believe, 138 degrees, that's like the thermal death point of yeast. It will just stop working. So you want to keep it nice and low, really pay attention and understand how yeast works, because it's a great, it's actually an amazing ingredient that was found hundreds upon hundreds of years ago, if not thousands, and we're still using it today, and we're still finding out great ways to use it. So just take care of it and understand it and learn about it.
Well, that's a wonderful way to finish off. So if you do want to give it a shot, each one of these 1-pounders will make 96 loaves, which is plenty for you to experiment with our recipes or with your own recipes. So definitely send us any questions you have in the comments below. Happy to answer them. And from here in the Modernist Pantry Test Kitchen, I'm Janie Wang.
And I'm Scott Guerin. Thank you so much for watching. If you haven't already, like, comment, and subscribe. And turn that bell on because it notifies you when we drop a new video.
If you like any of today's recipes, go to blog.modernistpantry.com. There you'll find recipes, Ask a Chefs, and tips and tricks, and more.
And if you have a friend who you think would like this video, share it with them.
And to get any of these great ingredients, just go to our website, www.modernistpantry.com.
And until next time, we'll be here in the test kitchen, helping you create memorable and magical experiences.